Hey everybody, welcome back. Today I've got a video that is a follow-up video for the upgrade that I did for this Polk. It's the LSI M703, if I got that correct. And it's going to be also I'll say more of a tech talk style video. So we're gonna dive into some of this and actually learn a little bit about crossover stuff today. Also, before I get started, I want to thank one of my customers who sent me this sweatshirt. He sent it to me about a year and a half or more ago, and I just don't wear it that often because we have pretty good weather down here in Texas most of the time. T-shirts and shorts anytime I can get away with it. But it's wintertime right now, and it's been really cold out. And this shirt that he sent me is super soft, and I love it. And I always wear this, my favorite shirt for the wintertime. So thank you. And any of you guys out there who, send me T-shirts, as you never know. I might wear it on a video. Now, let's dive into this thing. There is a lot to take in on this little episode here. And let's start with the Polk speaker as it comes from the factory. I bragged on it a little bit. The cabinet was made really well, really nice. It's braced. It's got pretty nice drivers in there that are fairly well behaved. And they did a great job on the actual design work. The crossover produced a nice, smooth response. There was no stored energy seen in the spectral decay or anything like that. The vertical and horizontal off axis were really good. They did a really good job of the actual design work in designing this thing and creating it to hit a price point. And that's basically what everybody does at some point. When you see commercial speakers out there, they're trying to hit specific price points and trying to better the competition at a specific price point. So they've got that restriction going into it. So this thing retailed like $1,500 a pair. And for $1,500 a pair, they're giving you a lot of speaker. I mean, they really are. You have to remember a speaker that retails for $1,500 and it's selling through a dealer network. They're having to reproduce that thing for about 1/5 of that retail price. So imagine $300 they're having to build a pair of these things. And in their case, they may have 350, 400 max, but they're in the 300 to 400 range. That's what they have to work with to build both speakers. And that includes boxing and packaging and everything else. So it's not a lot. And that's the reason that you see this level of parts at those price points. And you see it in every speaker at that price point. You're never going to see this level of parts quality in a $1,500 speaker because they would go broke. It costs more than that just to make it. So let's look at and compare upgrading stuff like this versus moving up and buying a more expensive speaker. I've had people say, man, before I spent that much money on an upgrade, I'd just buy a better speaker. I'd just spend that much more and get the next one up. Unfortunately, it really just doesn't work that way. Let's say you, instead of spending $1,500 on this and buying our upgrade, which this upgrade, depending on what you pick, your $950, $1,100 with all the tube connectors, there's options you can choose there. There's capacitor options. You're going to spend some money, and these particular crossovers here, this one does have sonic caps. That's these caps right here. They are a little more expensive than a standard poly cap, but it's a higher resolution, higher resolving cap, and a lot of our customers go for those things because it's well worth the money. It's added clarity, detail, resolution. It improves the layering in the sound stage and a lot of things like that. So that's a couple $100 just right there. Yeah, a couple $100. This smaller cap here is about $48. That one's about $52. So there's $200 just in 4 capacitors. All in total, this is about $875 worth of parts, and that's just retail price on the parts. That's not me marking them up above retail or anything like that. That's just what the parts cost. So imagine if they marketed this speaker and they put $875 worth of parts in there, that would hit the retail price $4,375. That's that much more that this would add to the retail price. And now you're looking at a speaker that's $6,500, $7,500. And in retail. And they could do that. They could do that. They could go after Wilson Audio and Magico and you name it, all those top speaker models out there. They could go after that market if they wanted to. They just don't choose to play in that market. They look at this and think, sure, we could build a $7,500 monitor, but would we make more money at that price point selling those versus if we just put this level of parts in there, sold them at $1,500, how many could we sell? That's a decision that Polk has to make. And it may be for them a good decision. It's more of their clientele and the way they're set up with their dealers, and they may own a little more of the pie at that price point rather than going up to a really high price point and trying to compete against companies that are going to be tough to compete against because they have a known name at those price points. So for you guys thinking, well, I'll just spend $3,000 and just get a better speaker. You're going to get for $3,000, it may be a floor standing version of this speaker with this same stuff inside. And you're not going to move up in performance anymore by just buying a more expensive speaker. It's almost always you're going to have more performance in the end by starting with a speaker that's got really good bones and doing those upgrades yourself, because then the markup is not there over on top of itself. In other words, whatever they spend to make the speaker, they have to make X amount of profit per every amount of dollar that they spend. So in the end, it gets more expensive, and then they're selling it to the dealer. And then whatever they're selling to the dealer for, the dealer wants 40 or 50 points, and they're marking that up more. So it's markup on top of markup. And when you have a lesser expensive product to start with, the percentage is still there, but the overall price doesn't get hit so hard. So it's a lot more economical for this to not get marked up a bunch of times, for you to just buy it, pay retail for it, and you put it together yourself, and you're not paying their profit on it and their dealer margins and everything else. So it comes out to be a lot cheaper in the end. You can buy a pair of these new, and you may can even find them cheap on the used market. Say you spend $1,500 for it, and you spend $1,100 on our upgrade with Sonic caps and with tube connectors, and you do all of it yourself. You may be into it for $2,600, $2,700 total, maybe a little more with shipping. But then you're at a point where you couldn't have gotten that kind of performance at those price points buying anything retail. It's really tough. Unless you go to a company like Tyler Acoustics or GR Research, where we're selling a product to you direct and we're not marking it up through a dealer network. And the margins are smaller because we're doing a custom speaker. Each time the customer orders it, we're building it, you're waiting for it to be built, and then we're shipping it out for you. That's a way of keeping the overhead way down on it. It'd be a whole different story if we had stuff mass produced and we had to store it and warehouse it, and suddenly the expense goes up quite a bit, and the amount of margin we have to add on to cover that expense gets a lot more expensive too. So there are ways you can order stuff like some of our finished product and get a bigger bang for the buck. But there's a lot of people out there who own a product already. They've bought something, maybe they've had it for a while, they like it, and they just want a fun project. And I get that a lot. Most of our customers, when they order a DIY upgrade, this is one of their first upgrades. They've never done one before. And so they're doing it to get their feet wet into DIY because they want to get into DIY, but they don't have the skills and the resources to design something from scratch. And let's face it, it takes years of experience and a measuring system and a lot of parts to have on hand to start designing things yourself. It's a lot of upfront costs. You're going to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get to that point. Starting with a kit is the way to start. It's easy. All the engineering is done. All you have to do is just put it together, and you have assistance from the DIY community. You can go to our forum, and there's tons of customers there who've done the same thing you have. They'll tell you what worked, what didn't work, what parts worked well with this or that, and what components they're using in this gear. And you can get tons of feedback and assistance, and you can always contact us, and we can give you help with assembly and walk you through it, talk you through it on the phone, make sure you understand. You can send photos of your crossover. We'll give you a thumbs up. Yep, you did that right, or you didn't fix this. There's a lot of assistance there for you, and we can make sure that you make it through the build if that's what you want to do. So doing a kit. There's a lot of bonuses, a lot of upside to doing an upgrade kit to something. Now, let's talk about the quality of parts. This is something that I wanted to talk specifically about, and I have people that'll say, "Oh, how do you know it sounds better? You just made it sound different," or "We don't know that those parts sound any better than the factory parts," or "Did you listen to it and make a comparison? Did you A/B the new one versus the old one to see if it indeed sounds any better?" We really don't have to do that every time. We've done it hundreds of times, and we do it with each and every part. We've compared inductors, we've compared capacitors, we've compared resistors. We know what characteristics each one has and what it does to the soundstage, to the detail level, and everything. I mean, we've made so many listening comparisons, it's crazy, and we still do. We still spend a lot of time doing listening comparisons. We use even the big and extremes over here as a test bed. The crossover is external. We pull that thing out of there and do things to it, put it back in, and make comparisons. We're constantly making listening comparisons, and I want to talk about some of that. We're going to start with coils. Let's start with the coils that are on this factory crossover. These coils here are what's called an iron core. That means they've got a solid iron core running through them. Now, what that does is it reduces the size of the coils considerably. Like this is a smaller one that's on the board, but it's an air core, but it looks bigger because it's an air core. That means there's nothing in the center of it. Now, while the iron core and this small gauge wire makes it very cheap, it does have an effect on the sound. And I'm going to show you some examples here. This is a 12 millihenry coil, and it's a 14 gauge coil, and it's got an iron slug in the middle of it. That means it's a solid chunk of iron. Now, that's what you do to a coil in order to keep it from being so huge. If this was a 12 millihenry air core, it would be this big around and that thick, and it would cost 4 or 5 times as much. But this core that they slide through the middle of it brings the inductance level up without having to use so many coil windings. So it's price saving considerably. But now, when the signal's passing through this thing, you remember this is alternating current, and the electricity is passing through this coil, and this iron core here holds a residual electrical charge. And what happens is that charge that is induced on this thing does have an effect on the sound that's coming through the actual connections. It tends to have a bit of a smear to it because it's holding that residual charge. It's not discharging it immediately. There's like an air core, there's nothing there to hold any kind of charge. So it smears it. Now, to step up from that, we often use coils that have a laminated core. Now, a laminated core is little stacks of steel plates instead of a big slug. Now, the reason we do this is it doesn't hold as much of a residual charge, and it dissipates it faster and has a better sound. Even better still, we move to what's called an I-core, and this one was from ERSI. This is from US Coils. This is a 14 gauge. This is a 16 gauge. They're both 12s, so they're both the same size as this big iron slugged one here, but it uses a laminated I-core. And if you look at it this way, you can see how it's got a top and a bottom, and it's got plates running through the middle. It looks like an eye. These do not hold as much of a charge. They dissipate pretty quickly, and they sound really good, almost as good in some cases as an air core inductor, which is really surprising. They're really, really good. That's the go-to coil for when you have to use an iron core or something that's a large value, and you don't want an air core that's really huge. Also, the air cores have a higher DCR. When you use those steel laminates in there, it lowers the DCR quite a bit. So your sensitivity comes up in the bottom end. Now, what we use those for is in anything that's below 200 hertz. Anything below 200 hertz, the wavelengths are pretty long, and any residual amount of smearing is not really heard at those low frequencies in the bass like you do when you get up in the mid-range. Those wavelengths are much shorter and much faster. You can hear differences in clarity when you get higher up in frequency, much easier than when you're in the lower frequency range. Low frequency ranges, these are it. These are ideal for those applications. Now, when you get into the mid-range, again, you never want that stuff in the mid-range, especially an iron slug, and that's exactly what you've got with this crossover. And then I'll show you the woofer circuit. This is the woofer circuit for this little speaker, and on this crossover, it's these three parts right here. It's a big air core, it's a 100 microfarad polycap and a resistor, and it's not a sandcast resistor. So the difference in cost, yeah, quite a bit, but the difference in clarity, also quite a bit. Let's talk about capacitors. There's a lot, even more differences in capacitors than anything. All capacitors tend to have some sound to them. And when you're looking at big values, usually the go-to cap for big values at this price point is electrolytic capacitor, because they cost pennies on the dollar. I mean, they're, 50 cents, 80 cents a dollar. And you start getting into big polypropylene caps like these JB caps, this 100 mic here like $36 a cap for that stuff. And here's a couple of 75s. That stuff starts adding up. And it is a lot cheaper to go with electrolytic cap, but it sounds a lot worse. The polycap's a much faster discharging cap. And then you get into what a lot of people consider a boutique cap, really high-end cap like the Sonic caps. They discharge really fast. The materials used in those don't disrupt the signal as much. They maintain what I call spatial cues. Things that are controlling the sound stage and the layering are more present in that, and the cost of those goes up quite a bit. I mean, you can order some really nice copper film caps from Dueland and just put Dueland caps in the tweeter circuit, and it may add $2,000 to $3,000 for those 4 capacitors for this speaker. And at some point you have to say, whoa. You have to say, that's too much money to spend on this speaker. There's a point of diminishing returns. You have to say, is it worth it? Is it not worth it? And then if you're building a $20,000 speaker and you're looking at some Dueland capacitors that are a couple thousand versus another, you may want to spend a couple thousand because you are trying to achieve the highest quality possible, and another 5 or 10% on top of the cost to produce may not be that big a deal. You obviously don't want it to be 200% of the cost of the upgrade just to use some capacitors. At some point you have to say, it doesn't make sense at this price point. Even with stuff like the N-Extremes, we're always looking for the bang for the buck. What sounds the best for the least amount of money, and at what point do we feel like it's worth it, and at what point is it not worth it? And in cost no object style price points where you're doing speakers that are at this performance level, then yeah, it's worth it. And the customers that come and listen, they say, absolutely, I want it. I want those capacitors. I want the top level everything. So going to some of our desktop speakers, XLS Encore, there's upgrade options there, but those upgrades are within the price points that we're trying to reach with that speaker. We're not going to go $3,000 caps in a little stand-mounted speaker. It doesn't make any sense. That customer's not going to buy that. And so when we put this stuff together, we try to figure out exactly what the bang for the buck is and what gives you the most performance for the dollar. And then sometimes we'll give the customer the option. You can order this with just the JB Poly caps and a little bypass cap instead of the Sonic caps, and it knocks $200 off the price. So from $875 worth of parts to $675 worth of parts. And this one is more expensive than a lot of our upgrades that we offer because it's a 3-way design. Note, when we're doing a 2-way speaker, the crossover point is a lot higher. The crossover parts are much smaller, and it costs a lot less. When you do a crossover at a low frequency, and then you start adding notch filters in there on stuff, suddenly you've got a lot of parts. And those parts are bigger values, like 100 mic and 75 microfarad caps, because you're dealing with low crossover points, and it gets a lot more expensive. And that's why this one is a little more up there in cost. Resistors also, these little Sandcast resistors cost nothing. Literally, they're like 10 cents, 12 cents, 18 cents a piece versus $1 a piece for the ones we're using in this, which we feel like are a great resistor. These are the Dayton copper resistors, and they're simply just tough to beat for the money. A lot of difference just in clarity right there. There's some smearing involved with the Sandcast resistors because they have steel end plates on them, for one. So big difference in quality, big difference in price. We have A/B compared and listened to all of this stuff, and we know exactly what those differences are. We've done this tons and tons of times. So when it comes to sound, though, what difference does this level of parts bring you versus this level of parts? Most of the time when a customer sits down and he listens to a speaker that's got this higher level, components in it versus budget level stuff, the biggest first thing that they notice is this is the sound stage. It's big, it's open, it's layered. There's things within the sound stage in different places. I know you guys hear me talk about this stuff a lot. That's where you really get the separation in performance. That's the big deal. There's also obvious differences in clarity and detail, and there's more space between notes. Where you listen to a lot of speakers with this level of parts in it, you may think, yeah, that song sounds pretty good. The singer is right in the middle of the sound stage there, and it's an accurate reproduction of that song. Then you swap out to something like this and you realize, oh my goodness, the singer is in the room. I'm hearing the performer in the room in front of me, not just a representation of the song. And there's just more air and space around everything. It's a whole different experience, and it's not subtle. Now, I have a lot of people say this all the time, like, show us sound clips, or, make sound clips of this so we can hear it. And I'm going to tell you right now, that doesn't do this stuff justice at all. I'm reluctant to do any of that stuff because when we've tried it, sure, you hear differences in detail and you hear resolution differences and things like that. That's obvious, but it's about 20% of what this brought to the table. All of that stuff that's in the sound stage and all that dramatic size and space doesn't come through in the sound clip. It's like as if I created a beautiful painting and I said, man, I spent 6 months on this painting. It's beautiful. Do you want to see it? Let me fax you over a copy of it. Would that really be letting you see the paint? You wouldn't know anything about the painting. I mean, you could kind of see, okay, he painted a whatever. But that doesn't give you the impression of what was really there in that painting. And it's the same way when you do sound clips. When you do a sound clip on YouTube and it gets compressed, and then you're listening to it on your laptop or with your earbuds in, even a good set of headphones, you're not going to get it. You're not hearing what those differences are as if you were actually here. You're actually in the listening room and you're actually hearing that speaker with those upgrades. It's not the same thing. Those differences in all those spatial cues, how things are layered, those don't come through in the sound clip. The sound clip crushes all of that stuff, and then what you're hearing is like the image that's been faxed to you. You're hearing just the playback of it. You're not hearing this sound system. You're not hearing it at all. And so we've been reluctant to do any of that stuff because it doesn't do it justice, and it's almost like false advertising. It falsely shows what's going on. It doesn't represent the actual product. Even take into account, let's say, sheets of no-res. You take no-res and you line a cabinet with no-res. Well, if you listen to it at low volume level, let's say you've got a microphone out in front of it and you're hearing it play at low level, well, you're not exciting the cabinet as much. The cabinet isn't resonating that much. But bring it up to realistic levels where you would actually hear it in a room, and suddenly you realize there's a lot of cabinet noise going on, and there's a lot of known speakers out there. As soon as I listen to it, boom, cabinet noise. Cabinet noise. As soon as you hear it, you can't unhear it. Line that stuff with some no-res, knock it out of there, and suddenly, wow, listen to those drum hits. Listen to that, how tight that bass is. That stuff doesn't come through that well in the sound clip because you're playing it at a low volume with a microphone in front of it. If you played it at a higher volume to where you're trying to show those differences, what you're really getting is just you're getting a lot of room coloration. You're getting a lot of reflections going on in the room, and you're not hearing the actual modification. You're not hearing what you're trying to show. You're hearing a room response. And again, that's not what we're trying to portray. We don't want you to hear our room while we're trying to show you the difference between this and this. What we're wanting to hear is, or what we want to portray to you is exactly what those differences are. And a lot of times in the sound clip, that's just not going to happen. That's why we always invite people to come and actually hear things for themselves so that they can really know what those differences are. Last thing I want to talk about is the way we put this stuff together. TJ sent this to us. TJ has a channel out there on YouTube. He does some reviews. He's a good customer, man. I like him. He's a great guy, and he has a great channel. And he works like 50 or 60 hours a week sometimes. He works producing Corvette parts there in Kentucky. And he just doesn't have time to do a lot of the assembly work. And I said, you know what? I'll put these things together for you. And we talked about it, and he wanted to just figure out a way that maybe he could mount the parts on a stand. So what I did was I mounted these vertically like this so that it could mount on the back of a stand. And this is a great way to do this upgrade if you want to do this. Figure out how you want to lay the parts out and lay them out in a way that you can use it, mount it on the stand. Now, I've still got to wire everything, wiring to and from all the drivers, and put some tube connectors on the end and things like that. And on the back of the speaker, I went ahead and modified the back of the speaker a little bit. Note the original binding post on here. There was some pretty decent binding posts. They're brass binding posts, but they didn't have steel nuts on them and stuff like we see on a lot of speakers. So I left one set for the low frequency, so that lessens the cost of the upgrade by a little bit. The sets of tube connectors are $59 a set. There's going to be one set on the input of these, and here's two more sets for the tweeters and the highs. And I drilled a hole in here and inserted another set so that you could, try wire the speaker basically from the crossover to the speaker. And so we've got tube connectors, and then the binding post. So we'll have tweeter, mid, and lows on there. So I wired all that up for him so that all he has to do is build his stands and hook all this stuff up, and he's ready to go. He also has a couple of pairs of these things. He's got a set that he can leave completely stock, and then he'll have his set with the upgraded crossover that we didn't change much. We set this up and did measurements on it just exactly the way they designed it, and we fudged some parts values just a little one way or another to common values. It actually smoothed a little, but it's not much. I mean, we're talking tenth of a dB here or there. It's well within the tolerances of the original crossover. So he's going to get to hear the upgraded version versus the old version. He can do a YouTube on it. He can listen to it and tell you guys what he thinks and give you guys some actual impressions on it. And I love it when our customers call us with the real impressions. They're always excited when they call. I wanted to upgrade. I didn't really understand what it was going to do as far as, all those intangible things. And they're usually very excited about that. And that just warms my heart when these guys call with that feedback, and we get feedback like that all the time. And that's what makes this worth it and makes me enjoy it. And for me, this is kind of fun stuff. I don't charge anything to do a lot of these upgrades. I do the design work for free, and I just sell you the parts because it's just fun doing it. And for some reason, you guys love watching upgrade videos, and I appreciate that you tune in, that you watch. I appreciate that you subscribe to the channel. If you haven't, again, please subscribe to the channel so you'll get notification of when new videos come. I hope you liked this one. I hope you guys appreciate a little tech talk style every now and then. And that's it for this one. I will see you guys in the next video.